Bulavinaka, namaste and good evening. This evening on Fiji Village Straight Talk with me, we've got two special guests. The chair of the Fiscal Review Committee, Mr. Richard Naidu, and the executive director of Fiji Council of Social Services, Vani Catanasiga. Tonight, very important night. Today, of course, we celebrate World Media Freedom Day, and in the true spirit of media freedom, we are doing this show which will focus on everybody who is calling out for information about simplification of what is expected in the months coming up with a national budget to be announced in July. People asking, how will this affect me? How will this affect my family? How will this affect my community? And most importantly, how will this affect our country? Richard, thank you very much for availing yourself this evening, and same to you, Vani. The question first, Richard. As Fiscal Review Committee members, you as chair, can you please explain what is being done to make our government more lean in terms of expenditure?
Yeah. Well, Vijay, first of all, happy World Media Freedom Day. I used to be in the media. Some of the most enjoyable times of my life were in the media, so I think it's a good day, and it's the first day for a long time without the media decree, so that's great. I think in terms of what the Fiscal Review Committee is trying to do, first point, I think there's 14 of us, and I think, as you probably know, Vani is an important member of the committee. She's the lead of our, what we call our social dimensions committee. I wanted her. She was one of the first people that I asked to join because she's just, very good advocate for the poor and the vulnerable, and we needed her there. I mean, in terms of what the Fiscal Review Committee is doing, we've had to do this. We're all part-timers. We're trying to do this in 8 weeks. We're trying to soak up a huge amount of information and then deliver some advice to government just on how it's got to map out its finances, for the next 10 years. It's not about the budget, although obviously what we say may influence the budget, but this is about a longer horizon than the budget. It's about 10 years. So we're trying to absorb all of this information and get out a report that isn't 500 pages long, and just focus on the main points. But it's about how the government raises money, how the government spends money, how we make sure that everybody is treated as equitably as we can, because I think we're very, very mindful of the poorest people in society, because they are the ones that it's government's responsibility to look after. So not all of the answers that we're giving are will make people happy, but I think for the reasons that we've tried to talk about, they are necessary, and it's up to us, I guess, to give a bit of the bad news. But I think it's really important to say this, Vijay. We're not doing it, and we're not saying the things we're saying because it's all doom and gloom. We can fight our way out of this. I think there is a good story at the end of it, but you've got to fight for the things that, you've got to fight to win. And sometimes fighting involves taking a bit of pain. And we think, in the end, there's no way around that. There is a bit of pain to bear for reasons that we can talk about.
About government expenditure, as Richard has said, that your focus is from the social front, and a very important one. You would know the feedback that's coming off the ground, Vani. What is your assessment on where government needs to cut its expenditure?
Yeah, I guess one of the things we picked up in our social subcom, as we call it, was that there could be a lot of savings just from better coordination. There's a lot of duplication in government programs, even with some of the programs that are geared towards poverty alleviation, that there could be better coordination in the sense that, different agencies, talk to each other about which groups they are targeting, so there's no duplication out in communities. We feel that in itself, if we got coordination, if we improved coordination with government, I think that'll take away some of the wastages. Because we find that over time, some agencies have started to do things that they were not really mandated to do, while the agencies that were mandated and understand the issues, particularly when you're talking about vulnerability, they were concentrating on programs that were established maybe 20, 30 years ago, and some of what, the theories that underlie some of the programs were no longer relevant. Yeah? There are new, perhaps if I would put it in the sort of the social lenses on it, some of the vulnerabilities that we're experiencing now, we didn't experience 10, 30 years ago. But we continue to use the same programs to deal with that vulnerability. And so other agencies have started to come into this field. And we found that because they didn't understand the issue too well, they didn't understand communities and how they coped, you'd see a lot of those wastages because they weren't talking to each other as well. So coordination for us from the social subcom is something that we've shared with the rest of the subcom that could be better improved.
I mean, in some ways, Vijay, I just maybe pick up on that. What we're actually finding is that we have to spend money in order to save it. One of the things that came through to us, for example, was this. Government spends $5 on building new things, new infrastructure, but $1 on maintaining it. And the experts tell us it's got to be exactly the other way around. You've got to spend your money on maintenance in order to improve the length of life of all of the assets that you own. And that's what we haven't done. So what is the result of that? They actually told us we have a model that's called build, deteriorate, rebuild. We don't maintain our assets. We don't have scheduled maintenance. It amazed me to learn, there is no whole of government program that looks over the assets and says, all right, that health center there, that will need maintenance in 5 years' time. Let's put aside money for that. That teacher's quarters in Namosi, in that particular primary school, that is going to need refurbishment in 2 years' time. There's nothing. There's no plan.
Nothing on equipment, nothing on...
Everything is just sort of made up as it goes along. I mean, Dr. Fong was telling us how they are really struggling in the Ministry of Health now because they've never had enough money. They've been underfunded for many years. And only now are they really able to get an inventory of their assets. They've got 212 different properties, hospitals, health centers, nursing stations, and particularly in the rural areas, the health centers, the nursing stations. They're all going to need, significant investment. But there's been no plan for this.
I want to talk about the former Minister for Economy. He's made some comments, Aya said Kayum, calling a group of city slickers meeting at GPH to decide, and it's all bad news. To quote him, he said he's afraid for the general public. Now the general public, as we know, that recently the members of the public had to go and do several things at CWM Hospital because of the ailing infrastructure and the call made. And it seems like Water Authority, we had the Water Authority of Fiji CEO here, and saying that, again, nothing significant as far as development has happened over many years. You are definitely analyzing the data. You have been branded as city slickers sitting at GPH, and people are frightened what you will decide on. What's your comments?
So, first of all, I suppose I'm a bit of a city slicker, although I'm a farmer's son. I grew up on a dairy farm. And we don't meet at the GPH. That's the Economic Summit people. We meet in the Ministry of Finance. Doesn't cost the taxpayers anything. We're not charging any fees. We're not collecting any allowances. We're quite efficient. But just touching on the two things that you touched on, Vijay, right? The first is the CWM hospital. What's changed? What's changed is now people are talking about it, and people are able to participate, and people are able to get in there and help. When previously, nobody was allowed to talk. Nobody in the hospital system was allowed to talk. Nobody talked about the deterioration of the facilities. What was the other thing? What was the other one you talked about?
Water Authority.
The Water Authority, right? The Water Authority, the same thing. We knew that the system was cracking up. We could see it in our water pipes. All of us have suffered water cuts. What we know now is that the Water Authority needs at least $800 million in the next 5 years just to keep Suva, or the Suva-Nosori area, upgraded and functioning. It will need billions more to get us up to the levels we required for sanitation, for wastewater treatment, all of those things. Haven't started even talking about that. Now, why are we only talking about it now? GPH, city slickers, whatever you want to call us. Why haven't we been talking about this for the last 10 years? And Vijay, this is, I think, the opportunity, right? The government changes. It's still the same debt. It's still the same budget. It's still the same people, right? So how are we going to actually make a change? And the change is things like the Economic Summit. Yes, we all meet, and yes, we all spend a lot of money, and yes, we all maybe just talk, but it's the participation. That's what changes. We've got to have information. We've all got to know what's going on. But the other thing is that people are stepping up to help now. I mean, that was the mood that came through in the summit. I mean, Vani, I think, will say the same thing, right? Which is people are saying, this is great. We can actually talk now. We can criticize now. We can bring problems to people's attention now without being criticized, without being cut off, without being threatened. That's what's different. It's the information and it's the participation. That's what's going to change the game.
We touched on health and water. It's big things for the people. What's your comments on that?
Yeah, FCOS did run a few surveys, and one of them was, the latest one was the WASH survey that we conducted across 4 divisions, and thankfully we've managed to bring that to the committee's attention, but some of the findings are quite concerning. And we're using that to try and perhaps influence the way we will tackle water and wash facilities or water, wash infrastructure. But I think what's key from there is that despite how we've progressed as a nation, there are some communities that don't have piped reticulated water. Our issues around waste management is pretty concerning. Our survey found that there is, those high risks of waterborne diseases in communities, informal settlements. And these are not communities that are, not only the ones that are far, these are communities like Ngawia and communities like just outside Lami. And these are issues that could have been addressed in the last 16 years, and they were never addressed. We, as an organization, we've had to fight to bring these issues to mainstream discourse.
Were you raising these issues over the last 16 years with the previous government?
We did. In fact, this WASH survey we did with the Ministry of Health and UNICEF last year, and somehow they were very concerned, Ministry of Health, that we wouldn't release this data because it was quite concerning. So we kept it there. There was, opportunities for me to share it at different forums, but I've never really, released it because Ministry of Health had asked, that we be careful, we be sensitive about the data that it presents.
Why? If it affects the people of the country,
That's
why
right.
not share?
That's right. And I think you should ask the former Attorney General that.
Did he stop that?
Well, I think the mood that was in government and the environment that many of these government agencies operated in was very closed. So we had to be creative about how we brought this data to reality, to be discussed in open forums. And so we're finding the opportunities here through, not only through the Fiscal Review Committee, but through the summit and other forums that the coalition government has opened up. But we did try and work in that space, the public finance management space, budgets, advocacy, disaster spaces. We were, careful too, so that we wouldn't harm the people that we worked with at the subnational level, our, civil servants who had to work and support community.
In our series of discussions, we will also be inviting the Fiji First and former Attorney General, because he played a big part in the former government. And we did invite him for straight talk leading up to the elections for the special straight talk on the economy, which also featured Richard as part of the panel. He did not accept the invitation, no comments were sent back. We will try again for one day for him to be sitting here as well, most probably answering questions with Richard and the Minister for Finance and others.
Yeah, and Vijay, just before, I just want to say that very quickly. We've had 8 weeks, and we've had 8 weeks with presentations from various government departments, statutory authorities. And that's come through very clearly now. People are freer to talk to us. They're free to talk about their problems. They're free to criticize what's been happening and say, this is a challenge. So we're trying to bring these things out. Because how are we going to solve our problems? If we don't
was it made to look like everything is hunky-dory?
You got that impression, didn't you? I mean, just simple things like CWM Hospital. You talk about all of the things that are happening now, and it was so difficult to bring out such simple information. I talked to Judy Compain, who's doing a lot of work, with IWA about. Just to fix small things in that hospital. And she told me something like, I think the other day, there was an $800 fix that finally got water into a bathroom in the maternity unit that hadn't been functioning for 3 years. Nobody knows, nobody is allowed to talk about it, and yet once you get the public in, this stuff is easy to do. Now that's what we want to do for the whole country. We need everybody to step up, contribute their skills, and just make stuff happen. And we can do that.
Talk about national debt quickly, Vani. That's definitely a concern. And the previous government, who sit in the opposition, saying it's manageable debt, it had to be done, and the current government does not understand. From your perspective, what's your comment?
Well, we did have I think around June last year, we organized a meeting here in Suva workshop, and we had our members from across the 4 divisions come in, and he was invited, the former Attorney General was invited along with his staff from the Ministry of Economy to talk about our financial situation. At that time, our members already had concerns about the debt levels and were asking questions. And when he responded to that, he showed us a video of Sri Lanka and a video of someone being interviewed over the Ukraine war as a way to try and allay the fears in the room. Now that we've come here to this point, and we've come to at that time we didn't, we had a rough idea about what the debt situation was, but now because the information has been made public about where we are as a nation with regards to debt. We had our members come in again just before the National Economic Summit. They were provided with the stats. Then they had the opportunity to process that. Then they talked about how do we prepare as communities. Communities are concerned. They don't want to, leave a legacy of debt for the next generation. They want that solved. And that's according to the discussion that we had a week before the National Economic Summit. In fact, they came up with strategies that they were going to suggest to government to deal with the debt situation. They are concerned that it'll, cut into the social spending, support for the poor. But they did make recommendations around how we should improve our spending, taxes, capacity building, now that the physical space is quite limited. They talked about how we deal with this even at the family level. So that's been shared with the Fiscal Review Committee. It's to say that communities know, there's always this assumption. I've struggled with that, the organization struggled with that, is there's this idea that communities don't know, so we'll solve it for you. But actually, communities know exactly what's going on. They can see it, they can feel it. And so the more we open spaces for them to understand what we're dealing with as a nation, the better it is for them to, it gives them the opportunity to prepare. And, anticipating helps with resilience. And that's what an open civic space does for community resilience. At least we have the space now. They understand what we're doing. There are some things they want prioritized. Of course, they know that there will be cuts in spending. Of course, they have anticipated that there will be increases in, food items, prices of food items. They think that there should be some targeted support for families to deal with what's coming.
National debt, Richard. What's your assessment after looking at all the figures?
I think, again, there's this rosy tinted view, which is, it's fine because debt to GDP is no problem because it doesn't cost us much to service the debt. Actually, it costs us about $1 in 3 of our taxes goes towards servicing our debt. So you can't say it's nothing. It's manageable. It's manageable. But the point is, if there is another shock, if there is another COVID, if there is a serious cyclone that hits Suva, could cause $700-800 million worth of damage, where is the money going to come from next? That's the problem. You see, I call it a triple threat, Vijay. We've been undertaxing for a long time. We've gotten used to this. Let's not forget, no more than 10 years ago, less than 10 years ago, we were paying 15% VAT. Our companies were being taxed at 28%. We started paying income tax at $16,000. We were paying much more tax back then than we pay now. What happened? We got these, and it all started after the elections. We got these people-pleasing policies which were, let's drop the VAT, let's drop the company tax, let's lift the threshold so there's a whole lot more people who don't have to pay income tax. Now, who is going to pay for this? How are we going to keep government going? And what was the gamble? The gamble was, we'll put all of this money into people's pockets, all the money that we've given away, and they'll spend, and the economy will grow fantastically, and that'll generate more tax, and it'll all be great. Now, that's called supply-side economics. Ronald Reagan tried that in the 1980s in the United States, and he failed. Haven't we learned any lessons from that? It doesn't work. You can't gamble on growth, and we have gambled with people's futures by taking taxes down, all of those different taxes. And so now when people say, we're concerned, taxes are going to go up. To be honest, they're only going to go back to what they were. And in fact, we're just working really hard to provide solutions that make sure they do not go back to those levels.
What is the total level of government debt compared to 2006? 2006, it was close to $2 billion?
I'm not good enough on my numbers to be able to tell you that because GDP has grown. So, when you talk about debt, it's not really the debt itself. It's the debt to GDP. It's the size of the debt compared to the size of the economy. If, you might have a $10 billion debt, but if you've got a $20 billion economy, that's only 50%. So you always got to look at that marker. How big is the debt against how big your economy is? Now, in 2006, I think the numbers were around 40, 42, 43%, maybe a little bit more. And then it started to creep up. And don't take it from me, take it from somebody like Mr. Narumbe. Right back then, before COVID, he was warning the government, as was Professor Prasad. Your debt levels are creeping up. Be careful. Because it was Mr. Narumbe who actually introduced me to this phrase, fiscal headroom. You have to have the room to be able to cope with a shock. Now, we were all thinking earthquakes, cyclones, whatever. We did not see COVID-19 coming. That added 40% on its own to GDP to debt ratio. We went from 50% to 90% in 2 years because we had no money. We had no tax income coming in. We had to spend money protecting the poorest people. And that took our debt to GDP ratio through the roof. Now, if this happens again, where is the money going to come from? Now, Vani talked about Sri Lanka. What happens is, we'll get a loan, all right, but the loan will have conditions. And that will say, pay rates have got to come down, taxes have got to go up, we're going to have to put pay cuts, or you have to put cuts into spending, social spending, because that's the only way you will get out of that. Now, that's what we're trying really hard with the options we're giving the government. It's what we're trying really hard to avoid, to recreate that fiscal headroom. And remember, while all of this is happening, the government's got something like $7 billion worth of projects on its books. Those are its priority projects. Those are projects to do with infrastructure, with sanitation, with water, with schooling, with housing. Those are just the priority projects. Where are we going to find $7 billion when our debt to GDP ratio is at 85%?
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. We'll be back after this break.
Download the all-new Fiji Village app. Get the latest news direct to your mobile. Get the latest sports updates from our scoreboards online. Navigate easily through our categories. Watch videos from Straight Talk interviews, local music videos, sports, and many more. You can now easily listen to your favorite radio stations from your phone. Download the all-new Fiji Village app right now.
Welcome back. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Our guest tonight, the Fiscal Review Committee Chair, Richard Naidu, and of course, Executive Director, Vani Catanasiga. We'll go back to GDP and how can we grow that cake, because everything depends on that. If our gross domestic product, which is everything that we produce in the country, if that value grows, then of course we can manage the debt and sustain the debt. Discussions happen on that during the summit. A lot of sectors have decided the direction they need to take. A lot of discussion on utilization of land, and not just relying on tourism. What are the steps being taken in relation to that?
So Vijay, I think there's a good story. There's the possibility of a really good story. I think there's lots of interesting things happening. There's people who want to invest. I think, the fact that we had a successful transition, a democratic transition from one government to another, that was a huge confidence builder. Very important. Because that was a thing that, the investment community saw as a risk. They worried about that. So we did that well. And so now it's about, what do we do next? I think probably people are waiting for the next budget, the business and investment community, to see what's happening. We are trying, and we have the permission of the minister to do this, we are putting out our thoughts, early. We're not hiding anything. We want to share how we're thinking in order that people understand and anticipate, what's coming. And we can talk a little bit about the things that, we're going to recommend. But one of the challenges we've always had, Vijay, and if you look at our ease of doing business rankings, ever since 2006, the graph has been down, down, down. And we, at one point, we were ranked 162 out of 190 countries in the world for ease of starting a business. Why is that? Why have we got to make it all so hard? So the very first thing we have to do, and one of the things that we will be talking about, is just getting rid of all of these needless impediments to investment, and just giving people confidence and making it easy. The other thing, is small to medium enterprises, SMEs. They're a really important part of the economy. They generate more jobs than, big city slicker investors who bring in $100 million. A lot of that's very capital intensive. So it's the small to medium enterprises that create a lot of economic activity. If we can make life easier for them, because if you're in a big business, you've got a CFO here and you've got a CIO there and you've got people who can run around and do it. If you're a small to medium enterprise, often it's just 2 or 3 people. They're trying to run a restaurant, they're trying to print the t-shirts or do, whatever it is they're doing. But at the same time, they've got to run around and deal with the government and their licensing and their National Fire Authority and their occupation health and safety. And all of that takes time that they just don't have. And so what we're doing, what we're looking at, and it's really pleasing to actually see that stuff is happening now to make all of that easier. I think, again, if we can just get rid of a lot of these impediments, a lot of these blockages, we build confidence. And that's how things start to move.
Vani, small businesses, backbone of the economy, and we saw that during COVID, and there was a lot of comment about encouraging people to go into small businesses, and we got a number of calls from some people when they decided, okay, I'll go and set up a small business. They went to open up a bank account, and one of the banks said your minimum deposit has to be $5,000. You from the social front side, what do you think should be changed to assist these small businesses in these kinds of issues?
Yeah, I guess there's been some great initiatives to support particularly women and young people, and I think FSEF has WebC, and I think there's a Youth Entrepreneurs Council of some. I think one of the things we have found is that there's a need for capacity building. There's also the need to do financial inclusion a bit better, right? We've run, at FCOS, we run one of the longest running microfinance institution in the country, and what we found is that when we don't reach outside of the sort of the urban centers, a lot of these good initiatives that are happening outside of the urban centers, they don't get the opportunity to grow because, one, they don't have access to the information on the government-funded programs that is supposed to help small micro enterprises. We ran this roundtable in the Western Division in the middle of the year last year, and there were lots of women that turned up. They run micro enterprises, and a lot of the sharing that took place there was, one, they didn't know that these initiatives existed to help support them. Then secondly, yes, they struggle with bank accounts. And many of the women who had come had joined our microfinance because, we didn't have as much of a, stringent requirement for opening that. And then the second thing we found quite interesting was that in these communities, so where the women come from, a lot of these communities had experienced disasters. They were impacted by disasters. And they recovered faster. Some of these communities recovered faster because of the activities of the women who were doing, micro, small businesses. One example that stood out was Lawaki Village, the women's cooperative. We had the opportunity to hear from Rise Beyond the Reef, which works with women in the highlands of Mba. They recovered faster from the disasters that had occurred because of these small micro enterprises that were operating within their communities. So yes, there are issues with bank accounts, and I think that one of the things that government should really look at, and that came out in our recommendations too, is financial literacy, not only for small micro enterprises, but at family levels. You'd be surprised. Some families don't have family budgets, and that's important. If you're going to anticipate shocks, disasters, you should have a saving. That'll help your families to recover. We've joined the RBF. I think there's a financial literacy working group, I think, of a committee of some sort, and we're beginning to share some of the lessons here. Yeah, hopefully this
$5,000 requirement to open up a small business account, is that under consideration, maybe to talk to the banks to lower that for those who are going into new business, small businesses?
I think so. I think that's key. Yeah.
And Vijay, I think the other thing, this is what I'm encouraged by. Obviously, as chair of Fiscal Review Committee, I get to sit on a couple of other things. Summit, we've got a thing called the Investment Facilitation Committee. And people are not waiting for the summit. They're not waiting for the Fiscal Review Committee. They're getting on with it now. It's really, what's really encouraging now is that the private sector is in there. You know, what used to be a closed shop, government only, ministers only, permanent secretaries only, the private sector is in there now. And we're saying, why don't you fix this? Why don't you do this? And so what actually the government is doing is it's making itself accountable to the people who pay the taxes. And that's a really important step. You know, we can talk about, you know, changing the Land Sales Act here and changing the exchange control rules there and, you know, doing things like improving short-term work permits. And all of that stuff it's a step here, it's a step there. But what's really needed is this whole change in attitude, because the government is now accepting, it's accountable to the people who pay the taxes. And those people are in the room now.
Now, Richard, as chair of the committee, you had said at the National Economic Summit that it cannot be business as usual, and the committee recommended VAT to be increased to no greater than 15%, but there will be retargeted support for the poorer people. Can you please explain to the people why this is necessary? First of all, VAT to be increased, and a lot has been said from leading up to the Economic Summit. Some like the FLP leader Mahendra Chaudhry and others have come out with statements saying you are just listening to the World Bank, what the World Bank is recommending, and you just want to increase taxes and make life difficult for the people. Are you doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, you know, I don't like to do easy things, Vijay. And I like challenging things, and this is one of them. And one of the really challenging things I think we have here is trying to explain, you know, why we're in the mess we're in. And I talked a little bit earlier on about underfunding government, you know, and the fact that the taxes that we used to pay as individuals were much higher than the taxes we pay now. And so in a way, all we're saying is we have to go back. Now, the World Bank, yes, people say the World Bank has an agenda and it's a global agenda and all of those things, and yes, we take that into account. The World Bank, they look at statistics, as do the IMF, they compare it with other countries. Those are not necessarily local solutions. That's true. That's true. But what those institutions do is they do very good research. They give us very good diagnostics. They analyze where we've gone wrong. That's where it's really helpful to us. So we get the information, they give us the advice, but it's up to us in Fiji to find the solutions, right? Now, we talked about the debt being too high, and the debt is too high, and that means that we can't borrow very much, and we cannot react to a disaster. So that debt's got to come down somehow. We haven't started to talk about our infrastructure and all of the things we're talking about. And we talked about the nursing stations, we talked about the water, we talked about, you know, a whole lot of things. We talked about the maintenance. None of this stuff is happening. That's why we need the money. And you see, if we don't do these things, we can't create the platform for economic growth either. We can't grow economically if the government is not supporting us, if the bridges aren't working, you know, if the water isn't working. Who's going to invest in Fiji, right? So all of this stuff is important. Now, let's talk about, you know, what we're going to do and where we're going to land. So when you're looking at the mix of options, what we're saying is that government's probably got to find another $500 or $600 million a year. That's what it needs to keep us in the way that we've been going now. You know, don't forget, in that time, we've built a whole lot of more roads. That means we have to maintain them. You know, we've increased social welfare allowances. We have to maintain them. We actually have to increase them. We have an over 65 pension now. Every year, there are more and more people in that category. We have to find that money. Just today, I was looking at the cost of dialysis. Probably $15 million a year now to keep all of the people who need to be dialyzed in keep them healthy.
You said $600 million more. Have you taken into account the wastage that has to be scrapped off?
Well, we try. And one of the things that we need is what you call a whole of government spending review. We've really got to just start again. You know, there's a whole lot of practices in government that really haven't changed literally for 50 years.
Why I ask you this question, because before the elections and during the elections, Professor Biman Prasad had said we have a wastage amount of close to 500 million in a year. Mr. Narumbe says close to $1 billion. Are these things taken into account going into this plan?
Well, I think what we've got to do is get in and see, you know, what can be fixed. And that's not... The fiscal review tries, but we don't drill down to the last detail. We're only, you know, we're a committee that's looking long. We've had 8 weeks to absorb, as I said, a lot of information. And so we see examples of wastage, you know, we see examples of money being spent better. But in many ways, Vijay, as I said to you, in some ways we actually have to spend more money to save it, right? You look at, for example, the extra money we spend rebuilding things just because we didn't maintain them the first time. You know, we can talk about there's a particular unit to help cardiac patients, so the name escapes me. Dr. Vijay Kapadia's, it's cardiothoracic, I think. This is the third time we're bringing that unit into the hospital. The first two failed for lack of maintenance, right? This is where the waste is. Now, ironically, we're going to have to spend money in the short term in order to save it. That's where the waste is.
I'll go back to it because the people would be interested in it because it affects their pocket. If the VAT is going up, if the VAT will go up to almost 15%.
Well, that's not, let's talk about that first, right?
Yes, if it goes up.
I think, our recommendation, unfortunately, is that VAT will have to go up. And do you want to talk about why that is?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, let's do it. Because people are saying to us, for example, don't increase VAT, increase the taxes on the rich, and you'll get the money you need. So let's talk about that. There are 161,000 people in the FIRCA system who file tax returns. So guess how many of those people actually pay tax?
Well, according to Revenue and Customs Service, the last time we asked them, they're saying it's very healthy. There's not a high level of tax evasion.
It's not that. It's not that. It's about the tax threshold. We're not talking about evasion. We're not talking about avoidance. We're talking about people legally who actually pay tax. Guess.
About 60%?
21,000 people out of 161,000 people pay tax. That's
Personal income tax.
Personal income tax. Why is that? It's not fraud, it's not evasion, it's not any of this. It's because of the high threshold, the $30,000. So there's a whole lot of people on wages and salaries, people in small businesses, and they're filing their tax returns, they're doing everything right, but they don't have to pay tax. All we're saying is, that's fine, that's the choice the government made, which was to keep the threshold high, which means that anybody who's earning under $30,000 keeps all of their income, right? But what does that mean? There's only 21,000 people left to pay personal income tax. And what does that raise? About $200 million a year. VAT, on the other hand, makes between $800 and $900 million a year. Customs makes about $450 million a year. So when you say go and tax people, there's nobody to tax with you. That's our problem. And
You are not recommending the personal income tax threshold to come down?
We are not. And the reason we are not is because we understand that if VAT is going to go up, and we think it has to go up, because we don't really have very many options, and we understand if VAT is going to go up, we can't attack people, in that $20,000 to $30,000 level. Here's the numbers. If we brought the threshold down from 30 down to 20. That means everybody paying more than $20,000 in tax, everybody earning more than $20,000 would start to pay tax. And everybody else would start to pay tax from $20,000, not $30,000. That's worth about, that would make us, we think, about $55 million a year. Now, that's a very small sum of money for the pain that we will be putting on 20,000 people.
So the VAT that you're recommending is even including the current zero-rated 21 items. Vani, what's your assessment based on the social front that you lead?
Well, here's the opportunity in that is that for the longest time we've been asking if there could be a review of the social protection, social welfare system. And I think the increase gives us the opportunity to do targeting a little bit better, because even currently as we're implementing these social welfare programs, there are many who are being left out who should be on it. Yesterday I was invited to a briefing by DFAT that was being done for the minister. The minister invited us. They're actually doing that. So it's going in tandem with what we are recommending here, is that they are improving the way they target poverty alleviation programs, how they support particular population cohorts, and there is some correlation to what the household income and expenditure survey is saying as well. So if it makes the system more effective, I'm all for it. I think that it's an opportunity, a good time to really look at how we improve social welfare and social protection programs in Fiji.
Low-income earners and middle-income earners definitely are watching this and thinking, more will be taken from my pocket. We know that. And you gave an assessment based on the low amount of people that actually pay personal income tax. You don't want to reduce the threshold. Is it the recommendation that we have to go through this pain? There's no other option?
Yeah, there is, Vijay, but just touching again on what Vani said, right? The whole purpose of doing this is to balance up. So when we put 0% on basic food items, it's true that poor people pay less, but so do you and I. Now, what we should be doing is our money should be going into the government along with everybody else's, so that that money can be used to target assistance to the poorest people. And so this is what we're thinking, right? What we're thinking at the moment is, and just to give you an idea, if we took the zero rating off those basic items, we would probably collect $220, depending on where you put the VAT, $1 million. Now, if you go to the household income expenditure survey, the median income in Fiji, the median household income, that is the dividing line between the top 50 and the bottom 50, is $21,000. So any household that is itself earning $21,000 or below, that's a low income household. We can probably use that money, the money that we're making on the VAT, to provide direct assistance to those households. It could be $100 a month, it could be something around that, it could be a little bit more. We can use that money and give it to the people who need it. Social welfare, we're spending about $150 million a year. If we put 20% on that, remember, we take VAT from 0 in some cases to 12 or 13 or 14%. We could fund a 20% increase in social welfare allowances. There would be no problem.
Are you confident a reform system, social welfare system, can come in time? Because if increases are approved and go ahead within the next few months, when do you expect these reformed social welfare systems to come through?
I think the review has already taken place, and that's why they were updating the minister. I think in the next, I was quite concerned about whether there was an architecture in place to ensure that we roll out that safety net, we strengthen those safety nets. And when I went yesterday, so I had those concerns, I was sharing it with Richard, but luckily I met the minister and I was able to sit into that meeting. You can see that they already have that in mind. So they're looking at different database systems, the FNPF, FIRCA, and a whole of government. So the only question I then posed to them, Minister, this is quite reassuring. Perhaps the next step would be to look at how civil society organizations that work in these areas can then, plug in the gaps wherever there is gaps. It's really about making sure that, because we're all concerned about the same things, it's about making sure that if you're covering this, I'm covering these other aspects. And I think with what I saw with the progress update to the minister yesterday, I'm fairly confident that we'll roll out quite a good system that'll kick in when the increases are put into place.
Yeah, Vijay, it's really important that everybody remember these are recommendations. This is just what the committee thinks. I think you reminded me. The PM was on Straight Talk last week. He decides. Well, the government decides what we actually do. But you raised a good question, right? Which is, when would all of this come into place? One of the things that I think this Minister of Finance is good at is giving people plenty of warning, not ambushing people, not taking people by surprise. And so one of the things that we've suggested is, if it's going to be announced in the budget, because this is normally what you would do in the budget, that you do not put anything in place until the beginning of next year.
Until the systems are
Give people time to prepare. Give people time to get the systems ready. We might even be able to get a couple of payments in before the new VAT rules kick in. This is our thinking, right? They're not government decisions, but this is our thinking about, an efficient way to do it. So give people plenty of time to prepare, give people warning. The old days when you all sat around and listened to the budget and you worried about whether your tax rate was going to go up or this was going to happen or that was going to happen, that was all economic policy by ambush. And that's what's got to end. We've all got to have plenty of information, plenty of time to adapt, because that's certain. That's what you call certainty, transparency, predictability. Those are the things that investors need. Those are the things that consumers need.
We'll go to a quick break and be right back.
Download the all-new Fiji Village app. Get the latest news direct to your mobile. Get the latest sports updates from our scoreboards online. Navigate easily through our categories. Watch videos from Straight Talk interviews, local music videos, sports and many more. You can now easily listen to your favorite radio stations from your phone. Download the all-new Fiji Village app right now.
Welcome back. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Our guest tonight, the Fiscal Review Committee Chair, Richard Naidu, and Fiji Council of Social Services Executive Director Vani Catanasiga. We go back to this issue. Of course, everybody is interested in why VAT and where do we go from here. There's a question from Kamlesh Sharma. He's asking why the committee is embarking on increasing VAT when it will hit the poor hard. No amount of substantive equality will bridge the gaps. As the government lacks a database on the poor in the society, why not increase corporate tax and look at increasing duty on luxury items?
Yeah. And that's a very good question. It's a very fair question. And the answer to that is, there's a whole lot of information in that question. The first one is about the social welfare database, and that is true. And one of the things that we have heard is that the social welfare, they don't have good integrated information. They can't even join up all of the different benefits and all of the different regions. So they talk about graduating people out of poverty, because there are some people on, and the assistant minister, she got into hot water when she said it, but there was some truth in it, right? Which is when you go into the social welfare role, there's no ability in the department to tell whether or not you should come off social welfare, whether or not you've actually reached the point where you're doing quite well. You just stay on that role forever because there's no ability to see if you should come off, because that's money that ought to go to somebody else. If you're doing well, you shouldn't continue to collect the allowance. That's money that has to go to somebody else. And so social welfare's got to be better organized, to ensure that the money goes into the right place. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, why don't we increase corporate tax? Corporate tax will increase. We've got some really smart people on that tax committee who are looking very closely at how that's going to happen. But definitely the recommendation, I think, is for corporate tax to increase. And I think the number that they're probably going to come up with, I think, is about 25%. But also, Vijay, what people don't realize is that many quite wealthy people don't pay much tax. That is because many of them organize their businesses through companies, and they take a lot of money out of companies in dividends. Dividends are tax-free. So if you pay yourself a low salary, but you collect a big dividend, you're paying less tax than you or me. And so we're going to try and fix that and equalize it so that, people who are well off pay something from their dividends. So that's definitely going up. But to come back to Kamlesh's point, right, and it goes back to what I was talking about earlier on. You can tax corporates, but even that's only going to raise $60 or $70 million, we think, by lifting that rate by 5%. So there are not many places for us to go. And unfortunately, VAT, because it's a broad-based tax, that's where you have to go in order to get the money that you need. So if you increase VAT by 1%, that's worth about $100 million to the government. And so unfortunately, that's where we have to go to find the money.
My question going back about wastage. You've been doing your assessments and coming up with recommendations. You're saying 8 weeks. There's a lot of digging deep that has to be done. Again, going back to Mr. Narumbe's magic figure of 1 billion wastage in a year. When can we find it? How can we find it?
Yeah. Well, I think 1 billion is probably a little bit high.
Well, Professor Prasad said around 500.
Yeah. I mean, we'll have to see if we can find that too. Obviously,
He's the Minister for Finance.
well, he
so
is now. Yeah,
him.
maybe I will ask him. But, I think that's the other thing. You come into government and, I don't know, perhaps a few more realities hit you. That's not my problem. I'm just a dumb old lawyer who's doing a fiscal review committee and then getting out of there. But I think, as I said to you, the question of waste and bad spending, it's a little bit more sophisticated than saying, take $100 off here or take fewer ministerial cars there. That's pretty small stuff. Where the real waste is in the really poor asset management. Because what that means is that you've got to spend more money to build again. So it's a little bit more complicated than saying cut here and cut there. And one of the problems we've had is that, after 2019 or so, the last government, they started a thing called fiscal consolidation. So they started cutting, and they started cutting departmental budgets, right? Now, when you cut a departmental budget, what happens? You don't have the resources to do your work efficiently. So you go to the Department of Town and Country Planning, their budget goes cut from $10 million to $4 million. All of a sudden, they don't have the resources now to help the local government councils process planning applications. What happens? Everything slows down. You talk to the Department of Environment. Over 4 years, their budget's been cut from $10 million to $3 million. And everybody is complaining about the time it takes to approve new projects. These are projects that we could be building quickly, creating investment, creating jobs, construction, all of these things. But because the budgets of government departments have been cut in a very arbitrary, disorganized way, what's happening? We're creating problems for the private sector.
Wastage. If we do not address wastage and we just increase taxes, that's what people are saying, that it will hurt people, and we're not addressing wastage, and we continue to remain fat as a government, getting more money from the people. How will you address that?
Well, I guess, I mean, it's not as simple as people make it out to be. This is exactly what Richard is saying. Is one of the discussions we've had. It's been really interesting at the committee level, because from our different subcoms, we're beginning to see some inefficiencies that we're suggesting, but we find that it's related to something else. If we touch this, we need to touch that. So one of the things that, perhaps we suggested as social subcom was, maybe we need to look at, government agencies and their mandates as set out in the law or set out elsewhere. But they really all need to go back there, because what has happened is, because there was that centralized decision making, and Richard might be able to explain a little bit more about this, centralized decision making, it just messed up a lot of the ways in which government processes worked. So there are no easy solutions. So like one of the things we talked about was, government vehicles. We've got to figure out. So even with asset management, them not having, like a central, management. It even applies for vehicles. So if we disturb vehicles, how does that affect the performance of a particular agency?
To me, it sounds like it's really messy and a full analysis is needed.
It's really messy, Vijay. And a part of it is the so-called civil service reforms. So I'll give you an example. We had a really interesting meeting with the Immigration Department. And the Immigration Department are cash positive. They're earning fees. They're putting money back into the Treasury. And they have opportunities now to increase fees on things like work permits. That doesn't hurt anybody except the people who need the permits and their employers. They can afford to pay. And there's going to be possibly visa fees. There's a whole lot of ways in which they can earn money. What they need to do, though, is improve their levels of service, because employers are complaining, you take too long, and so on. Now, to get 12, so they need 12 people. In any other organization, big organization, you would say, okay, well, we need 12 people over there. Let's pick them from over there. Let's get 3 from here and 4 from there and 5 from there. You can't do that in government, because there's nobody centrally. The Public Service Commission no longer has that control over the entire public service. The Public Service Commission only controls the permanent secretaries. And the permanent secretaries sit in their little silos, and they decide, who they're going to hire and who they're going to fire. So immigration's got to add 12 people. That adds cost to government. Unless we can find, but we're just adding to the payroll, even though somewhere else there might be 12 people who are not well used. And so we can't transfer them over. So when we talk about, spending and wastage, these are kind of built-in systemic things that stop us from being able to use our money well. So, it's not, you can talk about, you can cut a ministerial car here, or you can do that. That's small stuff. It's actually about fixing a system that we just need to completely restart.
How long will it take, this full analysis?
It's going to take a while, because one of the other issues that we have, Vijay, is, and again this comes down to cost, right, is that people are so busy doing things that they haven't got time to think about things. So we talked to the Department of Social Welfare. Almost all of their budget goes to handing money out to people. But there are no senior officers there who can do strategy. So they can't look at the trends and say, we're spending too much money here, we're not spending enough money there, we're not getting good value here, let's see if we can fix this or change the budget there. There's nobody who has a chance to think about it. And so all of these things, and remember, this is at a time, Vijay, when we are losing skills. Ministry of Finance said to us the other day they have lost 20% of their professional staff to migration, right? Now, you need clever people. You need people who can think and analyze and do this work. And at the moment, we're bleeding people, just like so many countries around the world. And so that's adding to the problems.
There's a question from Nigar Mohammed from Bow Street. He's asking you, Richard, as chair, why a convicted lawyer is the chair of the committee and whether this gives credibility to the whole process.
Yeah, all right. Well, you can ask that question, I suppose, and let's see what happens to this conviction. But the really important thing is there are 14 of us on this committee. I might be the face of it, but there's 14 really hardworking people. Some of them are really clever. People have put hours and hours and hours of their own time into this. It's not just the meetings we have once a week, and those meetings go for 5 or 6 or 7 hours. They meet in their subcommittees, they go away, they do, they do a whole lot of analytical work. And so there's 14 people on this committee. It's a collective view. It's not my view, it's not Vani's view. We all sit there and we argue about what the right thing is. And what's been really pleasing about this, is that we're not all city slickers, we're not all accountants and lawyers. We've got a really good representative group here. And we've been able to reach an understanding that unfortunately this is what we need right now. We can get through it, we can fix it, but we do need some money in the short term. We do need to take a bit of pain. But if we can do that, we're going to come out at the other end just so much better.
One question from Anishkal Naikar. He's asking what are the FCOS director's views on the statement by the Assistant Minister of Social Welfare that there are a number of recipients currently on the social welfare scheme who do not rightfully qualify. What are the director's thoughts on the amount of funding received and how are these funds from the donor agencies used?
I guess the Assistant Minister did highlight that weakness in the business processes for social welfare, which we picked out as well. That we were pretty good at enrolling people. We were not good with case management, which is about ensuring that these particular beneficiaries getting the necessary support, not just financial, to graduate them out of a system. Yeah? It's supposed to be a journey. So I think that then gives us the opportunity to talk about how we improve that, and Richard's talked about it. We've talked about targeting and how we need to make sure that we improve. We understand the indicators we're using for poverty, and we're targeting that support to those who need it, and then providing that extra support, and pulling in those who work around the sector to provide the support to graduate people out. It's not just a program you come and give money to and your job's done. No, you need to see a particular beneficiary, a family, go through this particular process where they are supposed to enable them to graduate, to find to be able to get off that support and to be a contributor to society, a positive contributor to society. And I think that the opportunity is now rather than later. We've got the political will. I think there's support from DFET to actually review the program, the approaches, to put in place a database, and the rest of us who work in other sectors can bring that support and strengthen our national system. It works for everybody, particularly during times of disasters and other shocks.
We're going a bit beyond time, just based on addressing questions that people have sent. But this is my final question, Richard. Do the Fiscal Review Committee members feel that they have covered all areas? And should there be more consultations with majority of the Fijians on the ground? I know there was an attempt made, I think in Bar no one showed up, and we will definitely have more shows where we'll invite the Fiscal Review Committee and others to address issues of national importance. But will you be going on the ground and having more public consultations?
Yeah. So Vijay, our report, we're furiously writing the report now because we have to hand it in next week. And there's a reason for that, because the government wanted to see what we thought so that it could start feeding some of this stuff into the budget, or not. If they don't like what we say, maybe they won't take it. But they want as much input as they can into the next budget, so we have to deliver, now. obviously, there's the input from the National Economic Summit. Remember, all of this stuff is new, right? So you've got a summit, first time after 16 years, and people pouring their ideas into the government. Then you've got the fiscal review, and we're trying to process all of this information. So, you asked a fair question, right? Did people participate, and should we be consulting more? I'm old enough to remember the last Fiscal Review Committee in 2004. I was a member then, I wasn't the chair. And we went around the country and we consulted. And the level of interest was about the same. In some places the turnout was very poor. In Lautoka we got 40 people. In Suva we got 50 people. In many other places, we had good participation. And sometimes it's about quality, not quantity. So the level of participation was about the same as it was, 19 years ago. We don't expect everybody to be interested in this stuff, and we know that people have got, much more pressing concerns. So, I think the level of consultation was okay. So we've got to get this report out. I don't know what happens after that, whether we're expected to stay on and try and make things happen that we want, or whether we're told your job's done, go away. But what's really encouraging about this is the process, Vijay, right? The Fiscal Review Committee is only one thing. The summit, was another one, and the summit's going to come back. The point is now that people are contributing, and we've got to share information so that everybody knows about the economy. All of this stuff about the tax system, about where the money comes from. The public should know this. They should know how much the companies pay. They should know how much personal taxpayers pay. They should know the importance of VAT in the system. If they know that, then they can help us, contribute, share information, look for solutions. We didn't talk about departure tax. We didn't talk about water resource tax. So water resource tax is going to stay about the same because it's already the highest in the world. Departure tax, we're recommending it goes back slowly, back up. So we're looking for other ways, to raise significant amounts of money. But at the same time, remember, we're trying to keep stuff simple for investors. We don't want to put too many new taxes in. So it's always a bit of a balancing exercise because we're trying to keep things simple, improve the ease of doing business. I've literally got a page of things here that we're going to be recommending on improving the investment environment.
And the analysis on expenditure, no doubt, it's a mammoth task. It couldn't be done in 8 weeks, but it is necessary.
It's necessary for sure. And what we need is, as I said, we need a whole of government review. Because there are processes in government that are literally 50 years old. They've been around since independence. And, we're not doing stuff well. I know when I go to a government department and I've got to talk to the government about something that's happening in the West, I have to wait for the file to come from the West in a van, the paper file, to headquarters before we can talk about it. People seem to move around the country just to attend meetings. There's a whole lot of systemic things that we just have to start and say, listen, it's 2023. Let's just see if we can do a whole lot of stuff differently. But, the IT system in government is not strong. The framework is poor. They're struggling to improve it. They haven't got the money they need. If we could make big changes in the IT system and make government more efficient and more integrated, we could save money, save paper. Those are the sorts of things we just can't do tomorrow or the day after. They're big issues, but we need to start.
Vani, for the people, definitely they will be affected if the prices are increased, if the final decision is made, and as we've discussed today, that a bit of pain has to come, but at the same time, the issue about wastage in government, will you be pushing to make sure that there is an analysis done as quickly as possible to see the wastage and where government can improve or become leaner?
Definitely. I mean, as FCOS on its own, we've been talking about that since 2020 because we were engaged in a public finance management project. We were quite key about some of the issues that we were experiencing, particularly during disasters, and that was coming from communities. But within the committee, we've had some discussions, particularly around a whole of civil service reform or review. Just even as basic as looking at, is this agency doing what it's mandated to do? What more is it doing that they're not supposed to be doing, that others are doing? We've even talked about that. And I think, like Richard said, it's a whole lot of work. 16 years.
16 years, 8 weeks, you cannot achieve everything, and we cannot achieve everything in one show, so we'll be definitely seeing the Fiscal Review Committee Chair back in one of our straight talk sessions as we lead up later on in the next few months. Thank you very much, Richard and Vani, for availing yourself to speak directly to our viewers and listeners. Next week we have a straight talk with Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Professor Biman Prasad. And then on May 14th, Sunday, May 14th, we have a special Fiji Village Straight Talk on Girmit celebrations, and we are anticipating confirmation of the appearance of Girmit Chair, celebrations Sashi Kiran, Reverend James Bhagwan, and Maramana Rokotuin Reketi Ro Temumu Kepa to appear on that special Girmit show. Until next Wednesday, have a good evening.